And so a third party sprang up, the Independent Party, and they nominated Senator Harry F. Byrd Jr. of Virginia. And he would choose a man we already talked about, J. Strom Thurmond, the senator from South Carolina, this fellow right here, as his vice presidential running mate. We talked about J. Strom Thurmond where? Back in the election of 1948. So there's going to be three parties in 1960. You're going to have the Democratic Party, Senator John F. Kennedy of Massachusetts for president, Senator Lyndon B. Johnson for vice president, Republican Party, Vice President Richard Nixon for president, Henry Cabot Lodge Jr. for vice president, and a third party, the Independent Party, Senator Harry F. Byrd Jr. of Virginia, running with Senator J. Strom Thurmond of South Carolina. So this is one of the most interesting and most watched presidential elections up to that point in history. Okay, that's going to take us then to our next subtopic, which is the campaign begins and the great debates. The campaign begins and the great debates. Now, the 1960 presidential campaign is going to provide two interesting scenarios that had never occurred before in presidential elections. Okay? The election of 1960 is going to provide two interesting scenarios that had never occurred before in a presidential election. Anybody want to guess what maybe the more obvious one was? The popularity of what media outlet? Television. Okay? For the first time in American history, a presidential campaign is going to be fought on television. Never before had candidates appeared on television. Because television was kind of a new thing. I'll give you some examples. Anybody know when the first television came out, what year? You might be surprised. What would you think?
1934.
That's pretty close. August 20th, you don't have to write this down, but August 24th, 1945. This thing was a great big speaker with a TV 5x7. And this rest, it probably stood this high, probably this wide, and the whole thing was a speaker, and the TV was 5x7. That was your first TV, came out August 24th of 1945. But here's some statistics that would let you know that TV is going to be a factor in this election. In 1950, they estimated that 4 million Americans enjoyed, and it was, a luxury of having a television. Okay? About 4 million people in the United States had a television in 1950. 4 million Americans enjoyed the luxury of TV in their homes in 1950. By 1960, when this election took place, that number rose to 44 million. So a lot of people had television sets in 1960 that did not have them in 1950, and that's why this presidential campaign is going to be fought on television. Another interesting scenario that had never occurred before in a presidential election is Nixon immediately made the campaign promise that he would visit all 50 states during his campaign. I'm not sure that's been done since that time, because presidential candidates usually don't travel to states that have 3 electoral votes. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But Nixon promised, which had never been done before, that he would visit all 50 states during the campaign. Now, this also would be the first time that presidential candidates faced each other in a live television debate. And what happened is Nixon and Kennedy agreed to face each other in 4 one-hour debates on national television during the months of September and October of 1960. So during the campaign, Nixon and Kennedy agreed to face each other in 4 one-hour debates on national television. Keep in mind, this would be a new big deal, and they were going to do this in the months of September and October. Now, there were 4 debates were held in 3 cities. Anybody want to guess which cities they held these debates in? New York City twice, Chicago, and naturally, Washington, D.C. So there was 1 debate in Chicago, 1 debate in Washington, D.C., and 2 debates in New York City. Now, people remember and have footage of the first one. That's the one everybody remembers. And that happened on September 26, 1960. September 26, 1960, and that took place in Chicago. September 26, 1960, in Chicago. It drew over 70 million viewers, which was a ton of people at that time. So on September 26, 1960, the first debate occurred in Chicago, which drew over 70 million viewers across the country. Now, what do you do at a debate? You accuse the other of their deficiencies, right? But who's going to be on the defensive in a situation like this? The Republicans, because they've been in office 8 years and they're going to hammer at everything they didn't do. You really can't hammer at the Democrats because they hadn't been in office for 8 years. So you're always a little bit of a disadvantage if you're the incumbent party, and that's going to be the case for Nixon. Now, I'm going to tell you what each of the others accused the other of. Okay? Okay? The main thing was that Senator Kennedy hammered at the fact that the Eisenhower and Nixon administration stood still, right? No progress, stand-patism, we talked about that. And they were only giving lip service to the following 6 issues. So Kennedy focuses his debate on the fact that the Republican Party and Vice President Nixon simply stood still for 8 years and gave lip service to these 6 campaign issues. What's lip service?
Like they just talk.
Just talk and don't do. Big talkers, no doers. You say you're going to do it, you don't. You said you did it, you really didn't. Okay? Here are the 6 campaign issues that Senator Kennedy accused Nixon of providing lip service to and standing still. Okay, he criticized him on increasing the minimum wage. Did he increase the minimum wage? But what was Kennedy's point? Should have been more. Look how much we did during the Truman administration, almost twice as much. You just put it up, 25 cents an hour. Okay, so he hit him on that. He hit it on expanding school construction. He said that Nixon, during the time he was with Eisenhower, stood still and gave lip service to expanding school construction. Now think another thing that what would he hammer him on that we're really concerned about, especially with the communists getting missiles, satellites into space? What else would he hammer the Eisenhower administration on? Not providing enough funds for what? Which is the E word. Education. Very good. He hammered them, saying that we're not even competing with the Soviet Union, especially, as you guys said, in science and mathematics. So he accused him of standing still and giving lip service to the issue of education. We're not, we got to put more money, got to pay our teachers more, we got to get some things going. The Russians are passing us up. Another thing that he hammered him on is Kennedy was big on hydroelectric power, producing hydroelectric power as an alternative power. And he criticized the Nixon years with Eisenhower for not doing more to produce more hydroelectric power. What else did we say that Eisenhower stood still concerning? It was a big issue that's going to get bigger and bigger. Civil rights, okay? Equality for all Americans. And Kennedy was smart. He didn't just talk about Negroes. He talked about Hispanics. He talked about Puerto Ricans. He talked about lots of different nationalities. He didn't limit it just to Negroes, which is pretty bright. But he hammered Nixon on standing still and giving lip service to equality for all Americans. And the last one, and I'm going to tell you a really off-color story in a few days about my mother, providing medical care for the elderly. Okay? That was a big deal. What do we call it now? Medicare. Now, Kennedy doesn't get all that done because of what happens to him in office. But Lyndon Johnson will carry that on, and we'll talk about it down the road. So, Kennedy accused Nixon of standing still and giving lip service to increasing the minimum wage, expanding school construction, education, providing medical care for the elderly, utilization of hydroelectric power, and equality for all Americans. Now Nixon had a little bit tougher time because he's part of the administration, but he did fire back at Kennedy and kind of get on him about three things. What is Nixon going to hammer on? The silver spoon life of John Kennedy. So right away, number one, he accuses Kennedy of being a spendthrift at the expense of the taxpayers. According to Nixon, Kennedy, if elected, would be a spendthrift at the expense of the taxpayers. What does that mean? What does that mean, Casey? If I say you're a spendthrift at the expense of the DC trip. That means when I tell you that, you know what, you get $10 for a meal and I get the bill and you spend $37. Okay? You have no regard, not you, but you have no regard for money. And all Kennedy's going to do, because he's used to being rich, is he's going to spend all this money to buy all these things that are unnecessary, and the taxpayers are going to be the ones paying the bill. That's one thing he did. Matter of fact, at one point in the opening comment of the debate, you'll get a chance to see it, Nixon let it be known to the television audience that he knew what it was like to be poor, referring to the differences between the way he was brought up and the way Kennedy was brought up. He got a shot in there, and you'll see that in the debate when I show it to you. Okay, another thing that Nixon said, firing back at Kennedy during the debate, is he said that building up an established political record is not something you stand on, it's something you build on. He said again that Kennedy had stated that he had an established political record, and Nixon said it's not something you stand on, it's something you build on. So if I'm comparing my experience teaching to a second-year teacher, and this second-tier teacher is coming after my job, and I say that an established educational record or teaching record is not something you stand on, it's something you build on, what am I saying? Yeah, I've been here a while. You know what I'm saying? This person's been here. He's saying, I'm the Vice President of the United States. I've been the Vice President for 8 years. This guy, Senator Kennedy's, you know, he's a senator. Well, Kennedy took offense to that, and you'll see it in the video where he compares some things. It was kind of interesting. Okay? And then the third thing Vice President Nixon did is he just basically made some positive comparisons of how the Eisenhower administration had made improvements from the Truman administration. And I'm going to tell you how Kennedy came back on that one. Okay? But basically, Vice President Nixon made several positive comparisons of, hey, during the Eisenhower administration, you don't have to write this down, we increased wages by 5% compared to the Truman administration. The gross national product decreased from 11% to 19% from the time Truman was president through the Eisenhower years. The interstate system of travel in the United States was established during the Eisenhower administration. Truman did nothing. Kennedy kind of fired back on that by saying, you know, I don't think it's important to compare what you did to what Truman did. I think the thing to talk about is what are you going to do from this point on? So if you're comparing yourself to what you say is a bad administration, what are you going to do from now on? And I think he made a good point. You'll see that. You'll see that in the debates. Okay, we will finish with this. All four of the great debates were heavily watched and well received by the American people. All four. The first one was by far the most watched, with 70 million. But there were a lot of people that watched the debates. So what's the big question? Because we're in a competitive society today. When these debates end, the question is, who won? Okay? And according to historians, there was really no clear winner. But I'm going to give you a couple of interesting scenarios to think about that came out. Number one, they stated that people that were old-fashioned, so to speak, and listened to the debates on the radio instead of television favored who? Nixon. Those that watched the television tended to favor Kennedy. And there's reasons for that we'll talk about tomorrow. Historians will also state that in general, Senator Kennedy probably gained more from the great debates than Nixon. Why? Because Nixon was the incumbent who had to defend himself 4 times on national television, and Kennedy was more the aggressor who could do more accusing. So historians will tell you that probably Kennedy gained more from the debates, but people that listened on the radio tended to favor Nixon. Those that listened on television tended to favor Kennedy. Now we're going to get into some details tomorrow on why. Well, I'm going to give you the details, and you can decide, and you can watch the video, and you tell me who you think won the debates, because we are a competitive nature.